In the vast tapestry of the cosmos, where stellar empires stretched across thousands of light years and ancient civilizations crumbled to dust forgotten by time, Earth had become little more than a footnote in galactic history. The third planet from an unremarkable yellow dwarf star, orbiting on the edge of spiral arm in a galaxy teeming with life, it was a world that no strategic map bothered to mark, no trade route deigned to include, and no imperial ambition sought to claim. Until now, deep beneath the weathered peaks of the Andes Mountains, in a facility carved from living rock and shielded by layers of electromagnetic dampeners, Dr. Alara Amin adjusted the sensitivity of her deep space receivers for the 1,000th time that month. The station was old, a relic from the days when humanity still dreamed of joining the great galactic community, before they realized that the cosmos had moved on without them. Now it served as a listening post, monitoring cosmic background radiation and the occasional burst of interstellar chatter that drifted through the void like echoes of a conversation happening in a distant room. Alara's fingers moved with practiced precision across the holographic interface, her dark eyes reflecting the soft blue glow of the displays. She had spent 15 years in this forgotten corner of human space exploration, content with the quiet work of cataloging signals that most of her colleagues considered noise. The facility hummed around her, a steady heartbeat of machinery and cooling systems that had become as familiar as her own breathing. Outside, the thin mountain air carried the scent of snow and stone, unchanged for millennia. Light years away, aboard the flagship Dominance, Grand Admiral Tharn of the Virexi Empire stood before a tactical display that showed the approaching star system in cold, clinical detail. The Virexi were not a species given to sentimentality or hesitation. Their empire had expanded through calculated conquest and efficient subjugation, absorbing world after world into their collective. 12 planets had fallen to their might in the last standard cycle alone, their resources and populations integrated into the greater whole with methodical precision. Tharn species possessed what humans might describe as insectoid features, though such comparisons were woefully inadequate. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the bridge lighting, reflecting shades of deep purple and midnight blue. 6 limbs allowed for complex manipulation of the ship's controls, while compound eyes processed information from dozens of displays simultaneously. To his subordinates, he was the embodiment of Virexi superiority, a being whose tactical genius had never known defeat. The decision to target Earth had been made in the Imperial Court, a gathering of the Empire's highest leadership where expansion vectors were plotted with the same detachment one might use to plan a mining operation. Earth's isolation made it an ideal target for what the Virexi termed cleansing, the process of removing unaligned civilizations that might one day pose a threat to imperial stability. The planet's technological signature suggested a species that had achieved spaceflight but remained confined to their home system, neither advanced enough to resist nor primitive enough to ignore. As the invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, the first anomaly presented itself. A signal, ancient and powerful, cut through the standard military frequencies like a blade through silk. The words were in a human language so old that even the Virexi's translation matrices struggled to parse its meaning, delivering the message in halting, uncertain tones. Do not proceed. This world is not yours to claim. Tharn's primary appendage twitched, a gesture his species used to dismiss irrelevancies. Communications, identify the source of that transmission. Unable to comply, Admiral, the communications officer responded, confusion evident in the harmonic undertones of its speech. The signal appears to originate from multiple points within the system simultaneously. Our sensors cannot triangulate a specific location. A defensive measure, Tharn concluded, though something in the signal's quality disturbed him. It felt old, older than the human civilization their intelligence had cataloged. Deploy Reconnaissance Probe 7. Map their defensive grid. The probe launched with a flash of energy, its sleek form accelerating toward the inner system at velocities that would tear apart any craft built with human technology. For several minutes, telemetry flowed back normally, painting a picture of a system remarkable only for its ordinariness. 8 planets, an asteroid belt, various moons, and smaller bodies, all arranged in patterns that spoke of billions of years of stable orbital mechanics. Then the probe vanished. There was no explosion, no energy surge, no distortion of space-time that might indicate an attack. One moment it was transmitting data, the next it simply ceased to exist, as if it had never been. The absence was so complete that for a moment, the fleet's systems questioned whether the probe had ever been launched at all. Analysis, Tharn commanded, his voice carrying undertones of what might have been concern in a species less convinced of its own supremacy. No debris field detected, Admiral. No energy discharge consistent with weapons fire. The probe's existence terminated at coordinates matching the asteroid belt's outer edge. It's as if the sensor operator paused, struggling to find words for something that defied conventional understanding. Continue, Tharn insisted, as if reality simply rejected its presence, sir. Back on Earth, Alara's equipment began registering patterns she had never seen before. The signals weren't coming from space, but from somewhere much closer, somewhere impossible. Deep beneath the ocean floor, in the abyssal plains of the Pacific where no human instrument had ever reached, something was transmitting. The frequency was unlike anything in her databases, a combination of electromagnetic radiation and something else, something that made her teeth ache and her vision blur when she tried to focus on the waveforms directly. She reached for her secure communication link, hesitating with her finger over the activation switch. Who would she even report this to? The Global Defense Council had been disbanded decades ago, deemed unnecessary in an age where Earth's greatest threats came from climate change and resource depletion rather than external aggression. The few military installations that remained were focused entirely on orbital debris and asteroid deflection. The decision was taken from her hands when every screen in the facility suddenly displayed the same message, written in characters that seemed to shift and change even as she watched them, somehow remaining readable despite their fluid nature. The Watchers remember. The Covenant holds. Let those who come in peace be welcomed. Let those who come in war be warned. Meanwhile, the Virexi fleet had begun to experience what Tharn would later describe in his final report as a systematic failure of the possible. 3 more reconnaissance craft had been deployed, each one vanishing at different points around the system's periphery. No pattern emerged from their disappearances, no defensive line that could be mapped and countered. It was as if the solar system itself had developed an immune response to their presence. Admiral, the tactical officer reported, its voice carrying harmonics of distress that were unusual for the typically emotionless Virexi. We're detecting massive energy readings from the 3rd planet's ocean beds. The signatures don't match any known technology in our databases. Tharn moved to the sensor station, his compound eyes processing the data streams directly. What he saw defied every principle of physics his species had mastered in their 1,000-year rise to power. Energy patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the standard 4, quantum fluctuations that suggested matter being manipulated at the subatomic level with a precision that made Virexi technology look like stone tools in comparison. Prepare for full fleet advance, he ordered, suppressing the doubt that tried to creep into his thoughts. The Virexi had not built their empire by retreating at the first sign of resistance. All ships, weapons to maximum readiness. We proceed to the 3rd planet. The fleet began its advance, hundreds of vessels moving in perfect formation, their combined firepower sufficient to crack continental plates and boil oceans. They had done so before on worlds that resisted too strongly, leaving them as barren warnings to others who might consider defiance. As they crossed the orbit of the system's outermost gas giant, the ancient signal returned, stronger this time, seeming to resonate in the very bones of every being aboard the Virexi ships. This is your 2nd warning. Turn back now, while choice remains yours. Tharn's response was to order an acceleration of the advance. The Virexi did not negotiate with primitives, did not acknowledge threats from species that hadn't even colonized their own system. Whatever defensive systems Earth possessed, they would be overwhelmed by sheer firepower and superior technology. It was the way of things, the natural order that had seen the Virexi rise from a single world to masters of a dozen star systems. As the fleet passed the orbit of a sixth planet, the one humans called Saturn, space itself began to behave strangely. Stars seemed to flicker in patterns that suggested meaning, though no computer could decode it. Navigation systems reported position errors that placed ships simultaneously in multiple locations. The neat formation that had been maintained for countless light years began to fray as individual vessels found themselves subject to forces that had no apparent source. On Earth, Alara watched in growing amazement as her instruments detected something rising from the deepest trenches of the Pacific. The readings were impossible, suggesting an object of such massive proportions that it should have displaced enough water to cause tsunamis across the globe. Yet the oceans remained calm, as if the laws of physics were being selectively applied. The emergence was witnessed by satellites and ground stations across the planet, though what they saw defied every attempt at description. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense, nor was it a machine as humanity understood the concept. The closest analogy would be to imagine a city-sized structure that existed partially in our reality and partially somewhere else, its geometry following rules that made observers' minds rebel at the sight. Ancient beyond measure, it bore markings that predated any known human civilization, symbols that seemed to tell a story of a species that had achieved transcendence and chosen to leave guardians behind. This was the Earth Sentinel, though that name would only be applied later by human scientists struggling to categorize something that resisted all classification. It rose from the ocean without disturbing a single wave, water simply ceasing to exist in the space it occupied. Miles high and impossibly vast, it hung in air like a mountain freed from the constraints of gravity, its surface rippling with energies that made the air itself sing. The Virexi fleet detected the Sentinel's emergence instantly, their sensors screaming warnings about energy levels that exceeded their measuring capabilities. For the first time in the recorded history of their empire, Virexi commanders experienced something they had no protocol for: genuine fear. All ships, combat formation, Tharn ordered, his voice carrying harmonics that betrayed his own uncertainty. Target the anomaly. Full weapon spread. The combined firepower of the Virexi fleet was legendary. Energy weapons that could punch through planetary crusts, kinetic bombardments that could shatter moons, exotic weapons that manipulated fundamental forces. All of this might was brought to bear on the Sentinel in a display of destructive power that lit up the space between Earth and Mars like a second sun. None of it reached its target. The weapon's fire didn't impact shields or defensive fields. It simply ceased to exist at a certain distance from the Sentinel, as if entering a sphere where the concept of directed energy became meaningless. Kinetic projectiles slowed, stopped, and then gently reversed course, returning to their launching ships at velocities too low to cause damage, but too precise to be accidental. Then the Sentinel responded. From its incomprehensible form, a pulse of energy expanded outward, not violent or destructive, but inexorable like the tide. It washed over the Virexi fleet in waves, and where it touched, technology simply stopped. Not damaged, not destroyed, but rendered inert as if the fundamental principles that allowed it to function had been temporarily suspended. Engines fell silent. Weapons systems went dark. Life support continued to function, but at a basic level that suggested mercy rather than oversight. The entire Virexi invasion fleet, pride of an empire that had never known defeat, hung helpless in space like insects trapped in amber. In that moment of absolute vulnerability, a presence made itself known to every consciousness in the fleet. Not words exactly, but a communication so fundamental that it bypassed language entirely, speaking directly to the core of awareness that all sentient beings shared. Observe. Remember. Leave. Along with the message came knowledge, downloaded directly into the minds of the Virexi like memories they had always possessed but somehow forgotten. They saw Earth as it truly was, not a backwater planet inhabited by young species, but the carefully preserved sanctuary of something far older. They understood, with crushing clarity, that humanity's current civilization was merely the latest iteration of a cycle that had repeated many times, each rise and fall watched over by guardians left behind by the first ones to achieve transcendence. The Sentinel was not a weapon. It was a lighthouse, a boundary marker, a gentle hand that guided younger species away from powers they were not yet ready to comprehend. Earth was not abandoned or forgotten. It was a nursery, a place where consciousness could evolve and grow under protection until it was ready to join those who had gone before. Tharn felt his understanding of the universe reshape itself around these revelations. The Virexi Empire, which he had thought mighty, was revealed as a child playing with toys in a sandbox, while adults watched from nearby, ready to intervene if the play became too rough. The thought was humbling in a way that transcended species psychology, speaking to something deeper than pride or ambition. Admiral, his second-in-command, managed to vocalize, its harmonics conveying a mixture of awe and terror. "What are your orders?" Tharn found himself looking at the tactical display with new eyes. The solar system was no longer a target to be conquered, but a sacred space to be respected. The Sentinel hung in space before them, patient and implacable, waiting for their decision with the certainty of geological time. "We withdraw," Tharn said, the words feeling strange in his vocal apparatus. The Virexi had no word for retreat because they had never needed one. Now, facing something that transcended military might, he found that withdrawal was not defeat but wisdom. The Sentinel's energy field pulsed once more, and the Virexi ships found their systems returning to life. But with that restoration came limitation. Their weapons remained offline, their engines capable only of retreat. They were being allowed to leave, but only in one direction, away from Earth. As the fleet began its withdrawal, pushed gently but firmly by forces they couldn't comprehend, the entire exchange was observed by countless sensors throughout the galaxy. The images of the Sentinel, captured by long-range telescopes and transmitted by faster-than-light communications, spread like wildfire through the interconnected web of galactic civilization. On 100 worlds, in 1,000 languages, the same question was asked: what sleeps on Earth? The Galactic Council, a loose confederation of the major spacefaring species, called an emergency session. The feed from the Virexi fleet was analyzed, dissected, and debated by the greatest minds of the age. The conclusion was unanimous and unprecedented. Earth was declared a forbidden sacred zone, a classification that had never been used before. No ship could approach, no probe could investigate, no species could claim sovereignty over the small blue world that had suddenly revealed itself to be anything but ordinary. In hidden corners of the galaxy, powers that had remained dormant for eons stirred at the news. Ancient archives were consulted, records predating current civilizations were exhumed from quantum storage, and patterns began to emerge. Earth appeared in the oldest texts, not as a planet but as a concept. The cradle, the first garden, the Watcher's Rest. Back on Earth, Dr. Alara Min found herself at the center of a storm she had never anticipated. Summoned before an hastily assembled council of world leaders, she presented her findings with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. The signals from beneath the ocean had continued, painting a picture of a defensive network that extended far beyond the single Sentinel that had revealed itself. "What you're telling us," the Secretary General said slowly, as if testing each word for hidden traps, "is that we've been living above an ancient defense system this entire time. That humanity is being protected by something we didn't even know existed." Alara nodded, her scientific training warring with the impossibility of what she had witnessed. The signals suggest a network that extends through the planet's crust, possibly into the mantle itself. We're not just protected. We're being watched, guided, shaped by forces that have been here longer than our species has existed. The implications were staggering. Every aspect of human history, every rise and fall of civilization, Every breakthrough and disaster had occurred under the watchful eyes of guardians whose nature and purpose remained largely mysterious. The ancient myths and legends that spoke of gods and monsters, of great floods and divine interventions, suddenly took on new meaning. In the weeks that followed, as Earth adjusted to its new status in the galactic community, changes began to manifest. The Sentinel remained visible, floating serenely above the Pacific like a new mountain range that had decided to ignore gravity. It didn't interfere with human activity, but its presence was a constant reminder that the universe was far stranger and more complex than anyone had imagined. Other things started to happen as well. Ancient sites around the world began to exhibit new properties. The pyramids of Giza resonated with subsonic frequencies that seemed to match the Sentinel's emissions. Stonehenge's stones developed a faint luminescence visible only in certain spectrums. The Nazca lines began to show patterns that only made sense when viewed from orbit, patterns that matched star charts from epochs when different stars had filled Earth's skies. Alara found herself appointed to lead a new organization, the Sentinel Research Initiative, tasked with understanding humanity's protectors. Her quiet life in the Andean facility was replaced by a whirlwind of conferences, consultations, and classified briefings. She became the world's foremost expert on signals that shouldn't exist, patterns that defied analysis, and guardians that watch from the deep places of the Earth. The Virexi Empire, meanwhile, underwent its own transformation. Admiral Tharn's report to the Imperial Court was met with disbelief, then anger, then a gradual, dawning comprehension that the universe was not as they had understood it. The Empire's expansion halted, not through military defeat, but through a crisis of purpose. If beings of such power existed, if Earth was protected by forces that could render their entire fleet helpless with apparent ease, what did that mean for the Virexi's assumption of their own destiny? Some within the Empire called for renewed aggression, for the development of weapons that could counter the Sentinel's abilities. But Tharn, forever changed by his encounter, became an unexpected voice for restraint. He had looked into the face of something beyond conventional understanding and recognized the futility of opposing it. "We are not the apex predators we believed ourselves to be," he told the Imperial Court in what would become known as the Revelation Address. "We are juveniles in a universe where adults walk among us, unseen until we threaten something under their protection. Our choice is simple: evolve our understanding or face irrelevance." The debate raged across Virexi space and beyond. Other species, emboldened by the demonstration of Earth's protection, began to question the established order. If humanity, seemingly isolated and technologically inferior, was under such guardianship, what other secrets did the galaxy hold? What other sleeping giants might be awakened by reckless expansion? On Earth, as the months passed, Alara's research began to yield troubling results. The signals from the deep were not constant. They were increasing, as if the Sentinel's awakening had triggered a cascade of activations throughout the planetary defense network. Seismic sensors detected movement in places where no geological activity should exist. Ocean floors showed thermal anomalies that suggested massive structures warming up after eons of dormancy. The most disturbing discovery came from a deep drilling project in Siberia that had been abandoned decades earlier. The borehole, which extended over 12 kilometers into the Earth's crust, had begun to emit structured signals similar to those Alara had first detected. When a team was sent to investigate, they found that the bottom of the hole was no longer solid rock, but a smooth, metallic surface that hadn't been there during the original drilling. "Something is waking up," Alara reported to the Global Council, her voice steady despite the implications of her words. The Sentinel wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Our protectors are stirring, and we have no idea what that means for humanity. The question took on new urgency when observatories detected movement at the edge of the solar system. Not ships this time, but something else. Dark objects, kilometers in length, were emerging from the Kuiper Belt and beginning a slow journey inward. Their signatures matched known technology, but they resonated with the same frequencies as the Sentinel. The galaxy watched with a mixture of fascination and fear as Earth's mysterious guardians revealed themselves to be far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The Sentinel had been a warning. These new arrivals suggested something else entirely, a mobilization. In the depths of space, aboard ships from a dozen different species, the same thought occurred to observers across the galaxy. Earth's guardians were not just defending. They were preparing. The question that no one could answer was, preparing for what? As if in response to the unasked question, new signals began to emanate from Earth. Not the ancient warnings that had turned back the Virexi fleet, but something else. Information, compressed and encoded in ways that challenged the best cryptographic minds in known space. When finally decoded, the message was simple and terrifying in its implications. The Watchers have slept long enough. The cycle turns. The inheritors must be ready. Alara stood in her new office, looking out at the Pacific where the Sentinel maintained its impossible vigil. In her hands, she held the latest analysis, patterns that suggested the activation of systems not just on Earth but throughout the solar system. Mars showed thermal blooms in regions that had been geologically dead for millions of years. Jupiter's moons exhibited gravitational anomalies that hinted at massive structures hidden beneath their ice. The human race, which had spent its entire history looking up at the stars and wondering if we were alone, now faced a different question. We weren't alone, had never been alone. But the things that shared our world with us were so far beyond our understanding that they might as well have been gods. And now they were waking up. The story that had begun with an invasion, fleet approaching Earth, had become something far greater. The Virexi had not encountered a superior military force. They had stumbled into a nursery and awakened the babysitters. The question now was whether humanity was ready to learn what those protectors had been guarding against. In government bunkers and corporate boardrooms, in scientific laboratories and military command centers, the same realization was dawning. The invasion had not been turned back to protect Earth from the Virexi. It had been turned back to protect the Virexi from what was about to happen on Earth. The Sentinel pulsed with new patterns of light, and deep beneath the ocean floor, things that had slept since before the first cell divided and the primordial soup began to stir. The galaxy had witnessed Earth's power and recoiled in fear. But that power was not Earth's to command. It belonged to entities whose purposes remained shrouded in mystery, whose plans extended beyond the lifespan of stars. Humanity stood on the threshold of a new age, protected by forces it didn't understand, guided by intelligences it couldn't comprehend, and preparing for a future that no amount of scientific advancement could have predicted. The nursery phase was ending. Whatever came next would reshape not just Earth, but the entire galaxy's understanding of its place in the cosmic order. And in the depths of space, in dimensions that human mathematics couldn't yet describe, ancient minds that had watched over Earth's slow development toward consciousness stirred to full wakefulness. The time of watching was ending. The time of action was about to begin. The message they transmitted was not directed at humanity or any species known to galactic civilization. It was aimed elsewhere, at coordinates that corresponded to no visible stars, toward recipients whose nature remained mercifully beyond mortal understanding. Phase transition initiated. The harvest approaches. Prepare for emergence. The galaxy would remember this as the moment when the comfortable assumptions of 1,000 civilizations were shattered. Earth was not a backwater. It was a seedbed. Humanity was not alone. It was a carefully cultivated crop, and the farmers were coming home. In her office overlooking the Pacific, Dr. Alara Min felt the weight of terrible knowledge settling on her shoulders. She had started as a researcher studying cosmic signals. She had become the guardian of humanity's most terrifying truth. Whatever humans were meant to become, whatever purpose their protectors had in mind, the time of ignorance was over. The stars looked different now, no longer distant lights full of promise and mystery, but eyes watching, waiting, judging whether the experiment had succeeded, whether humanity was ready for harvest, whether the long investment was about to pay dividends in a currency that no human mind could grasp. The invasion fleet had approached Earth expecting easy conquest. What happened next had indeed terrified the galaxy. But that terror was nothing compared to what was coming. The Watchers were awake. The Guardians were moving. And humanity's true purpose in the cosmic design was about to be revealed. In the end, the Virexi fleet's approach had not been an invasion. It had been a trigger, a test, a final examination before graduation. Earth had passed. Now came the commencement ceremony, and no one, not even Alara, with all her knowledge of the signals from the deep, could predict what form that ceremony would take. The future stretched ahead, vast and unknowable, shaped by forces that had been ancient when the Earth was young. Humanity's childhood was over. Whatever came next would determine not just the fate of one species, but the destiny of consciousness itself in a universe far stranger and more purposeful than anyone had dared to imagine. And still the Sentinel watched, patient and eternal, waiting for the moment when its true purpose would be revealed. The galaxy held its breath, frozen between terror and anticipation, as Earth prepared to graduate from nursery to whatever came next in the vast curriculum of cosmic evolution. The story had begun with an invasion. It would end with an ascension. But whether that ascension would be humanity's triumph or its transformation into something entirely other remained to be seen. The Watchers knew. The Guardians waited. And in the depths of space and time, forces older than matter itself prepared to welcome their newest graduates into a reality that transcended everything the galaxy thought it knew about the nature of existence. The invasion fleet had approached Earth. What happened next had terrified the galaxy. What happened after that would reshape the very fabric of reality itself. The nursery was closing. The universe would never be the same.